So the next speaker is actually, it's not you, it's Subodh Dave. And Subodh is someone who I met only about a month ago. He's an associate dean at the Royal College of Psychiatrists. And he's developed early support and mentoring programs for international medical graduates. So again, this is very much the sort of initiative you may not have heard about, but actually achieving real change through personal determination. So he's provided mentoring programs for international medical graduates, addressing root causes of differential attainment and focusing and supporting and valuing trainees. So Subodh will be speaking on how we can narrow the gap in attainment for BME students and trainees. Thank you, Subodh.
Thank you, John. It's great to see you all here. It's really a stellar cast. But I think probably just to echo Anis's point, I think part of the issue, I think, is about the kind of people we have in the room. And I think this is in fact the battle that I fought in my role as associate dean, is that when I organize a meeting like this, I want more white colleagues in the room than there are. And I think a lot of the times we have meetings like this and we have the same faces. So I'll touch upon how we've tried to probably address that issue. I was going to talk about what's the differential attainment, but seeing the room, I think I'm going to skip that part, so I'm going to skip a lot of the slides. I think everybody in this room knows what the issues are. I will probably touch briefly upon why does it occur, because I think it's probably worth reminding ourselves about the issues. Certainly going to focus on how we can reduce it. So to first start off, I think is, Umesh, you asked the question, what's changed in 25 years? I think one of the fundamental changes that's happened that I see is that maybe 25 years ago people thought of migration as a one-way traffic, and I think that's changing. I think certainly a lot of doctors, I think you touched upon it, people have gone abroad for whatever reason. It might have been because they weren't getting opportunities in the UK, but I think that's changing now. People are just, we are, as medics, are a globally migrant community, and I think people will go where they will see opportunities. So I think that's probably changing societal attitudes as well. And I think that will be a force that will continue. But having said that, I think we are operating in a society where there's general hostility towards migrants. I think this is a slide from 4 years ago following McManus's report, which might come up later on in the day. I was off to America to do a talk on this issue, and on the plane I picked up the paper, and there it was, calling me as someone who was working below British standards. And this really hit me hard last year. My mother was visiting me, and I think Windrush has been such a shameful scandal, I think, and yet it's hardly been talked about. I have been embarrassed by the lack of coverage of the absolute scandal that it is. And I think the reason for that clearly is that everybody's complicit in it. And I think that probably tells us something about why though we know why race equality matters, though we know how big a problem it is, it's not talked about with the same degree of outrage that we would expect. I think that lack of outrage, and I think part of it is for us not to lose that outrage. I think that's quite important, because we all can get desensitized. Even though we may passionately believe in it, we may get desensitized to it. So last year, my mother was visiting me, and unfortunately she had a fall. And I took her to my local A&E. She's obviously an Indian citizen, and I and my wife both been here for over 20 years, British citizens now. And the receptionist asked me for my mum's passport. And they refused to even register her till I got her passport. So my wife had to go home, fetch her passport. Now, I'm sure this was not the way the rules and regulations are meant to be interpreted, but it just creates a hostile environment. And I think that's the kind of racism that Anis has talked about, that there is a general sense that international medical graduates and ethnicity and black and I think minorities operating is difficult. But there's a silver lining of the cloud. I think we've seen that when the Windrush scandal did break out finally, and what's amazing is the story had been known for 4 years. 4 years, British children born in this country, gone to local school, were sent to detention centers. People who grew up in this country from a very young age were deported. And yet, for 4 years, the mainstream media, the mainstream establishment sat on the story. And where is the outrage? And I think the reason why that outrage was missing was people just assumed that this is something that we can steamroll over. But when you looked at the people's response, was that people wanted compassion and fairness. And I think that's the values that you talked about, Charles. And I think we really have to hammer those values. That can we really work in a society? Do we want to be a part of a society where we don't have the right sort of values? And I think talking about those values is very important. So I'm going to skip this slide. I mean, these are standard figures. Everybody knows what differential attainment is. And I think, like Chand highlighted, like in pediatrics, it's true for psychiatry. Being in a training post in the UK is a risk factor in terms of your success in professional exams and in your professional career. And that's really a question for whom? For the entire NHS, for our training system, isn't it? For every trainer in this country, that's a question. And yet, why is it that trainers are not asking that question? So you find that training organizations are not discussing this question. Why should this question be discussed in this meeting here? And I think that is the question that we need to be posing everywhere. And I'll come to that. I mean, these factors are true for, so I'm going to skip this. I mean, our exams are not unique in the fact that they show a very low percentage of pass rates for people who have qualified abroad, and also for black and ethnic minorities. But we should not forget that migration is a risk factor generally. So if you look at medical schools, and I think in these kind of discussions, the spotlight has been on Royal Colleges. We've almost forgotten that medical schools also exist, and they also show the same kind of differential attainment. We forget that. We forget also that differential attainment is also seen in all higher training establishments. So there is something about migration that in itself creates a problem. And I think when you think about it, why would it not? I mean, adjusting to a life in the UK or anywhere else is not easy. And GMC looked at this. I think Anish talked about it, that the research is a factor. And I think I've come across that. A lot of times I've been saying, well, where is the research? Where's the evidence? But the GMC has got the evidence. So we know that, and I think for a lot of people in this room, you must have been abroad, looked at medical schools abroad. I think the kind of focus on ethical frameworks or confidentiality or safeguarding may not be present abroad as in this country. My daughters are not trained doctors. They haven't read the good medical practice. They go to a local school. But I think even without having read the good medical practice, they would know what and how to behave according to the good medical practice. Now, our standard way of operating is that we save £250,000 by importing a doctor, and then we expect that the day they land in this country, you will send them an email with a link of good medical practice, and you expect that they will somehow magically imbibe the values in good medical practice and practice according to the standards. Where would this kind of system work? Where else would that be allowed to work? And yet that sense of outrage is missing. The NHS saved £250,000 for every doctor, and yet we import thousands of doctors every year. Every year in the GMC, there are 5,000 international medical graduates joining the register. What kind of support have we offered them? We've not even spent a few £100 in acculturating them to practice in the NHS. So sending them a link to Welcome to UK Practice or Good Medical Practice, I don't think that's the mustard. But that's existing practice and has been for a long time. And I know Anis responded to this study, and I think Bapio commented on it. So my point is not about looking at the merits of the study, McManus's study. I think a lot of you in the room will be familiar with it. My issue is that even if you accept the findings as they are, that when you know that your international medical graduate who has a PLAB score of X is more likely to fail the exam, the post-grad exam, what have you done in the year one to support them? So let's not even go into the fact that whether the PLAB is an institutionally discriminatory exam or not. But the fact that you know that, how are your trainers using that information and knowledge to support the trainee who started working with you? Does that happen? Does your trainee ever get asked the question that, well, how do you do in your PLAB? What are the strengths that you bring to working in the UK? What are the learning needs you have? That simple, basic conversation just does not happen. And which is quite shocking when you think about it. And of course, there are essential cultural issues. I think so. I'll just let you read the slide because I think that kind of highlights the problems that IMGs face, and I think they continue to face. I continue to see international graduates who come up against the linguistic and cultural barriers that this slide illustrates. So I'm sure I've been told very interesting quite a few times, and I interpreted it completely wrongly. But my central thesis is this, that if we have a system, and this finding of differential attainment is true across every college, across every medical school. So if we have a system that is constantly snapping at a particular weak link, how long can we go on by blaming the link? How long can we do that? At some point we have to question the system that's allowing that to happen. And our systems are allowing that to happen time and again and time and again. And surely the system that needs fixing. And I think that central redesign of the system is what is lacking. And I'm going to talk you through some of the issues that I came across. So when I took up the role as Associate Dean, I went around the deaneries to see, well, what are you doing? I think all the deaneries in the country know that pass rates for international medical graduates is about 30-35%, pass rate for local graduates is about 80-85%. I thought, well, this is common sense. Surely this must be a topic on their agenda. If you are the chief executive of Marks and Spencer and you've got a store that is doing 30% of the business that other stores are doing, that would be on your agenda all the time, right? You'd be thinking, well, why is this particular store not doing as well as other stores? I found that not a single deanery had this talk on their agenda as a standing item. So what does that say? It's not even a standing item on their agenda. It's not even on the agenda. Let's forget about talking about solutions. It's not even there on the agenda. So that's the kind of base we're starting off with. And this is 3 years ago when I took up the post. So this is not a million years ago. So I think we have a real mountain to climb. So I know the spectacular work that's been done by people, but we are starting from a base where this is not even on the agenda in the mainstream. I think it's changed now in the last few years, and I think, which is a good thing, but I still feel that there are pockets across the country where you will find, and deaneries in schools, where this is not on the agenda. So this is a question I asked my schools as secretary. How do you know that your IMGs, do you know how many IMGs do you have? Do you know how many are passing, how many are failing? If you're the head of school, surely you'd be interested in knowing that, right? No. And even now, I don't think we have got a central dashboard which allows us to get this data. How can we justify this? HE has got a budget of £5 billion, right? How can we justify a system where head of school, the postgraduate dean, or the training program director does not have this data at their fingertips? How do you target that support to people who need it if you don't have the data? And there are lots of barriers in giving the data. Well, there are data protection issues, candidates won't sign up to it. There are always barriers. It's up to us to find and overcome those barriers. And as has been talked about, this is not really about, we're not asking for anything extraordinary or special. This is basic education. Your simple educational measure requires, if you've got a trainee who's got dyslexia, what do? You don't say, well, go back. You say, well, let's see how can we support you, right? So it's identifying learning needs. So this is basic common sense educational principles. And that's what frustrated me the most, because Britain is supposed to be the epitome of leader in education. And yet this basic educational principle is missing. People fail the exam, do they get feedback on why did they fail? That's common sense, right? If you fail, you need specific feedback on, well, what did I do badly? How do I improve next time so that I don't fail again? Do you provide that kind of feedback? The answer is no. When you come into the country, in your first meeting when you're discussing education supervision, you want to know, well, what are your strengths that you bring, what are your learning needs, and how can we help you achieve those learning needs? Does that discussion take place? No, it doesn't. And I think focus instead is on exams. 3 years later, the exams, 3 or 4 years later after they've done the training, they fail, then people are sent to exam cramming courses. It's the wrong end It's too late by then. And as a psychiatrist, I know the impact of early trauma. And I think what we are doing is we're inflicting early trauma on a lot of our trainees. And everyone in this room must know people who have been victims of those microaggressions. Little traumas. Every clinical supervision, every time they do an exam, every time they do a test, is a traumatic attack. And that builds up, it knocks their confidence. These are bright people who are leaders in their own country, and we blight them after they arrive in our country. How can we allow that to happen? I think that's the question. That outrage must exist. And I feel that that's the lack of empathy. I found that there was a real lack of knowledge amongst my own colleagues about differential attainment. So many of my colleagues were surprised. Is that really true, 30% versus 80%? Well, that's been true for the last 20 years. It has been true for the last 20 years. I think if we share the information, people will realize. And then I think we can start tackling some of the standard arguments that we've seen from the establishment that Anis referred to. That we can't dilute standards, or that these trainees are untrainable, or they are insightless. I'm a psychiatrist. I deal with insightless people all the time. If a patient was insightless, I wouldn't turn them away saying, oh, we can't treat you. So even if you take the argument there is an insightless trainee, I don't even buy that first of all, but let's assume that they are. So what? So what? We are the training system. We need to support that insightless training, right? We can do that. We can work with them. There are ways in which we can help them. So I think for us, different people will respond to different kinds of arguments. I think for some they will respond to the moral argument, but there will be a few people for whom that argument won't be sufficient. I think we will have to wield the stick. It's a legal argument. I think public sector equality duty has been established. There's a financial case, and most importantly, there's a quality case. I think that the more we engage people, how can we allow a section of our workforce to totally lag behind in terms of their career opportunities so that they're not fully engaged? We all know that the more engaged your workforce is, the better our patient outcomes. So my three-pronged approach was this: supporting trainers, and I think my focus really was on trainers rather than trainees, because I realized that that's where the weak link was. Then try to support trainees, but also create an accountability framework. So I'll talk you through what the things we did. So for me, I realized as I traveled across the country, the sheer lack of awareness that was there about these issues. So forget, the mountain of changing attitudes and changing people's views. Basic knowledge about the differential attainment and the discrimination that some of our trainees are facing was missing. So just creating that awareness was important. And I really feel that one of the concrete outcomes from today might be is that we create a simple module where every trainer needs to know what the facts are. And I think that is missing. Every trainer is now required to do a course in clinical supervision or education supervision. How can you do that unless you know? And I cannot imagine there's a single trainer in this country who has not had an international medical graduate as a trainee. It's not possible. With 40% of our workforce being international, I just don't buy that that's possible. So that was my first target. And I think we've had 30 engagement events across the country, and I can really say with a degree of confidence that we've managed to raise the awareness amongst psychiatric trainers to a significant extent. We created training videos just talking about this issue because insightless training came up so often that we really thought that we needed to deal with this. So we created a couple of videos highlighting that, and they've been used in our training events. One of the things that really surprised me was that as a trainer, most of our trainers do not themselves know what the exam looked like. And you are going to support your trainee in the exam. You don't know what the exam looks like. And the training system allows that to persist. So a bulk of our trainers actually didn't know what the exam looks like and still don't know, I think. So this is a work in progress. So one of the things we've targeted is improving our trainers' knowledge about what the exam looks like. And that seems to be bearing some fruit. But the biggest challenge I thought I came across was that my white colleagues particularly found it very difficult to have conversations about race, about ethnicity, about the fact that you grew up in Malawi or Zambia, now you work in the UK. What does that mean? How does that, you're from Pakistan, now you're going to work in Birmingham. What does that mean? Now, unless you have that conversation, trainees want that conversation. They've just moved, they want to have that kind of conversation. And what happens in practice is that you're treated like any other trainee. So you walk in and you get the same induction and you get the same kind of initial supervision session from your consultant colleague. And so we've tried to sensitize our trainers to actually have those awkward conversations that they feel are awkward about race, about training abroad, about what are, and about the strengths. I mean, I've been in this country for 25 years and I've not been once asked to talk about what experience do I bring to the NHS. And that is daft. We have 200 doctors, we have doctors from 200 countries. You'd think that you'd want to tap into that experience, but that just does not happen. So we've started saying, well, invite your local trainees to talk about the work environments they come from. That's a good way of breaking that ice. Get them talking in the journal club. So we've done some forum theatre workshops, and we realized that rather than kind of lecturing people, it's much better if we engage people. So I don't know whether people are familiar with forum theatre, but essentially we do a role play where an actor plays a consultant, and then the people in the room, the consultants in the room, can then pause the role play and ask the consultant to do things differently. And that seems to really get the conversation going, because then people realize that when a consultant starts an initial conversation and don't know how to do. So we've had a Brazilian trainee and the consultant starting a conversation very awkwardly, talking about the carnival, not focusing on the education supervision session at all. So I think having those awkward conversations is something that we found that the training experiential workshop has been very helpful. And we've had 4 workshops so far, and the response to that has been really positive. Our biggest piece of work has been around MTI trainees. So people who are not familiar with MTI Medical Training Initiative, this is in a way a small group of people. So we've had about 60, 70 trainees who come through this route. And we've been able to offer each trainee a specific mentor. So each trainee is assigned a mentor. So we've trained about over 100 mentors across the country. And that's again been quite a successful enterprise. And what has been most successful, I think, is the approach that we've adopted, which is said, well, we involve the local trust, the local college division, and the local deanery. And I think creating that network to support the trainer and the trainee duo has been quite helpful. We've created a website where resources are available for both trainers and trainees, and that has received over 3,000 hits over the last year or so, which has been quite positive. So our focus in trainees has been to support them very early on and recognize that the earlier we identify problems, the earlier we can remedy them. So like I said, our focus has been on accentuating their positives, changing the narrative from a deficit-based narrative to thinking about that what doctors bring in both strengths and learning needs. How do we identify both? So for those who are coming to the MTI scheme, we hold a national induction at the Royal College of Psychiatrists, where they come in and have a whole day's induction. We discuss a range of issues, essentially acculturating them to work in the NHS. They also get to meet their mentors, have one-to-one with them, and obviously trainees can choose a mentor, so we provide them with a list. So if they have specific interests, which they do sometimes, then they can choose one, but if not, we can match mentors as well. And this has been very successful, and the past results for MTI trainees of those who have attended the exams have been far, far superior to those who have not had this kind of support. So I think this shows that early mentoring and early support does show positive results. We created a guide, a clinical attachment guide, which we published. It's for both trainees and trainers. So we recognize for some people returning to practice or starting to work in the NHS, an attachment offers a good way of acculturating themselves. And we realized that the standard of attachments varied a lot across the country. So we've tried to standardize this to say, well, what are the experiences that how can you support your trainees to make sure that this is the most fruitful experience for them? One of the things I really wanted to tackle when I took on this role was to change the level of diversity in educational leadership. So that, I feel, is part of the problem. Roger has written about snowy white peaks in NHS Trust. Unfortunately, the same thing operates in our training environment, and I don't think it's been talked about enough. And so I think I don't think I've had much success in this, but I think I've raised awareness about this issue. I think the number of heads of schools, the number of postgraduate deans, the number of senior education leadership positions occupied by BME communities is very, very small indeed. And I think that needs to change if you want to see some genuine change in leadership. So maintaining accountability. So very early on I created this framework, and I'll let you read the slide. I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty details, but there were quite a few. This was a challenge from me to all the deaneries, to all heads of school, saying, well, can you deliver on this? I'm glad to say that most of them have signed up to it, and I think over the last 3 years I've seen significant progress, certainly in psychiatry schools across the country, where there has been a significant improvement. Now this still leaves a big chunk where we haven't been able to influence things very much. So most of our trainees don't come through a single route, so international medical graduates come through different routes. Now especially as some trusts are going and organizing their own recruitment drives in India, Pakistan, South Asia, Africa. So we are seeing another influx of international medical graduates, and to support them and find mentors for them has not been an unmitigated success. But we're trying to address that through the local schools and asking them to try and track every person who comes in. We're also working with the core recruitment so that every person who comes to core recruitment gets that information. So we're trying to improve our data processes essentially, so that the schools get all the data from the core recruitment process, so that they know how to offer support at a very early stage. So final stage, I think I just want to spend a minute on this slide. I think culture is absolutely important. I think that has to be our main aim. And I feel culture changed. I think Ani spent a lot of time talking about providing the leadership. But I think for a BME person to provide the leadership is not always easy. And I think I have found that I've struggled with some of my BME colleagues. And I have empathy with them. I don't blame any of them, because I think not many of them want to talk about BME issues for fear of being marked as a BME leader. And I think that is it's a difficult place to be in. So though you might be a good leader generally, for you to be then placed in a niche position, and I think this is again not true for us doctors alone. I think Satnam Sanghera, he's written about this, that as a journalist, he's often asked to write about BME issues only, though he's a good journalist. He's not a good BME journalist, but this is a cross that we have to bear. But I think it's a cross that we have to fight. I think it's absolutely important that we involve our non-BME colleagues, I think. And I think that's important. If you can't talk about this at the board level, if you can't talk about this in your medical advisory committees, then you're not doing a good job. This should be a mainstream issue. And we have to make the case that this is not really about just fighting for my rights, it's about fighting for the rights of my patients, it's about fighting for the rights of what is good for the NHS. And starting at the top is absolutely important. And I think that's something I've learned, that in the Royal College of Psychiatrists, having the support of the president is important, having the support of your CEO is important. And then you involve every layer. But ultimately, we have to make both a rational and emotive case. And I think personal stories are absolutely important. And we've engaged a lot of informal solutions. And I think Roger has talked about this, and I think I learned that from you, Roger, is that a lot of the times trying to create formal solutions, it doesn't work very well. I think what's probably worked very well is for us to have set up WhatsApp groups locally, where, because I tried to get a psychiatric trainees committee to have enough BME representation, and it just didn't work. And then I said, well, try and set up WhatsApp group locally, and then people have done that, because when they tried to set up the IMG support groups, that didn't work at all. Nobody wanted to go to a support group. But they set up a WhatsApp group, and people were joining the group. And so I think we have to think about, we have to be creative about how do we become more inclusive without trying to single out people. So I'm going to stop there, just plug for our meeting, and I hope that a lot of you can come to that meeting. It's a day-long engagement event on developing diversity in leadership, and I think that's really the focus. I think we have to really try and work on that. So hopefully leave a message for that. Thank you.
I'd like to switch the microphone back on. Yeah. I said right at the outset that today is very much about solutions, and what you've heard today from Subodh has been some really tangible changes he has implemented. The mentor scheme, which has actually shown improvements in exam success rate for international graduates. Real credit to you, Subodh, and these sorts of lessons need to be shared across the NHS, and we wish you well, and thank you very much for speaking today. I'm now, so Thanks again. I'm now going to move on to our next speaker, and as I said, we've got a range of speakers who, right from grassroots to those who work for organisations, but this is a grassroots doctor, Dr. Ronx Ikharia, who is an emergency medicine doctor. She self-funded her way through medical school after leaving home in her teenage years and graduated from King's College in 2011. She's extremely community-focused and volunteers her time to give inspirational talks at schools and carries out one-to-one and small group sessions with young people keen on getting into medical school. She's recently joined the presenting team on a popular children's TV factual medical show due to air in autumn this year, is that right?
Yeah, it's Operation Ouch.
Great, fantastic. And Ronx will be speaking on effective action to widen access to the profession, highlighting her personal story and pathway into medicine. Welcome, Ronx.
That was really nice, thank you. Hello everyone. I think we're running behind time a little bit. My talk is worth it, so if you have about 45, if you only get about 45 minutes for lunch, I think we're all used to that, right? Okay, so I feel really privileged to be here. My name is Dr. Ronx. I want to thank Dinesh and his team for inviting me to talk on Twitter. That's great, thank you. My talk is in 3 parts. Part 1, I'm kind of setting the scene. I'm getting us to think about the social climate in which we live, and I'm going to use some buzzwords which can be related to the NHS. In part 2, I'm going to be summarising kind of my struggles and highlighting bits of my life up to date. I want to show solidarity to some people in the room who may have experienced some of the things I have, and I want other people to kind of understand some of the things that us BAME, so that's black and majority ethnic people, kind of have to go through when it comes to applying for medicine. And in part 3, because this is about effective change, I want to talk to you about some of the things that I've done and suggest some things that we can do to kind of widen access to the profession and to improve the kind of experience of BAME doctors. So the title of this talk is Effective Action to Widen Access to the Profession. Kind of suggests that I have the answer, and like my previous speakers, we don't. But what I want to do is to inspire and persuade every single person in this room that you, me, we are role models, we are the mentors, we are the people, we are the agents of effective change. A recent BMA report suggests that us, BAME people, doctors, feel undervalued, we feel treated unfairly. We're told that the attainment gap in medical school is related to ethnicity. We report we are more likely to suffer from bullying or harassment, and we are overrepresented in fitness to practice cases. For some of us, this is surprising. For some of us, it isn't. Us BAME people, we're not just doctors. We exist in the world too. So I thought it would be important to talk about some current topics which indirectly and directly affect the psyche of BAME people today. The most recent being the outcome of the Dr. Bauer-Garber case and the perceived racial undertones. I personally worry about increasing national and international far-right views within politics and society. I worry about the consequences of Brexit. I think a lot about the callous death of black and ethnic minority bodies worldwide by the police, by war, by sea, and by each other. I think about black and ethnic minority immigrants being demonised. Some of these people are doctors. I think about our black boys, patients, family members being reported to be in gangs and knifing each other. I worry about the scheme Prevent and how it affects our BAME children. I'm concerned about the rise of hate crimes towards minority groups. I worry about stop and search practices that affect our BAME boys. And I'm really sad about the death of BAME people in the Grenfell Tower tragedy. I lived in a tower block like that. I squirm at the tokenism of black bodies on TV like Love Island. And I'm disappointed that in 2018, companies, systems, people are still saying that they're failing their BAME employees. There are an increasing number of BAME people who feel let down over and over again by society. We feel demonised and stereotyped. These people are also doctors, and we sometimes, and maybe often, feel let down by the medical institution. So I'm left here thinking that my very visible, honest and open vocal existence as a black, queer, Nigerian doctor is resistance to all of the things that I've spoken about above. And that's how my motto, you cannot be what you do not be, you cannot be what you do not see, was born. I get really evangelical when I'm talking on these subjects. I don't want to come across as divisive or NHS hating or bitter or anti-white. I'm not. I'm not here to point blame, but my honesty might make you feel uncomfortable. But it's only when we recognise that we feel uncomfortable that we can all work towards realising effective change within our NHS. So I've got 3 uncomfortable things to say about the NHS. White privilege exists in our NHS. But remember, white privilege is not saying that as a white person you haven't had a hard life. It's saying that the colour of your skin is not one of those things that make it harder. Uncomfortable thing number 2 is unconscious bias exists within our NHS. So what is unconscious bias? It's the social stereotyping of certain groups of people that we form outside of our conscious awareness. And we must note that certain scenarios can activate problematic attitudes and beliefs which can inform our behaviour. So think about all of the things that I said before which worry me, and think about how they inform your behaviour and how they make you feel. Lastly, institutional racism exists within our NHS. I really like this definition from the McPherson report. It defines institutional racism as a form of collective behaviour, a workplace culture, supported by a status quo and a consensus, often excused and ignored by our authorities. So in the climate of the issues that I've raised above, how can we reduce the impact of white privilege, unconscious bias and institutional racism within our NHS, so that we can not only begin to effectively widen access to medicine, but to improve the levels of satisfaction amongst its BAME staff? I don't know. But what I do want to do is use examples of my life to help you understand why I believe that every single one of us here are agents of change. And although we cannot change the system, we do have control of how we navigate within it. So this is part 2. I'm going to talk about my life. I think it's important that some people who aren't BAME and some BAME people realise that we all have struggles, and some of our struggles are specific to our upbringings, what we look like, etc., etc. So some things might trigger people, so if you're triggered or you want to chat more, you can talk to me at the end. I was born to Nigerian university-educated parents who came to the UK as economic migrants seeking a better life. Unfortunately, that life did not manifest. They moved from relative luxury in Nigeria to a high-rise council estate in South London. They were forced to undertake menial jobs for which they were 100% overqualified to survive in the UK. I was fostered as a child. Actually, many firstborn Nigerian children were privately or officially fostered to white families. Some of us had great experiences, some of us didn't. This has led to a legacy of fractured family relationships and emotional issues existing amongst a generation of BAME people. Some of them may be doctors. I returned to live with my parents permanently by the age of 10. I attended the local state primary school close to the tower block in which I lived. The estate was poor. There were drugs, there were gangs, the area was poorly maintained, so this meant playing out wasn't safe. So my life consisted of home, school, and church on Sundays. We were too poor to go on holiday. We didn't eat out, and my main role outside school was to look after my younger siblings, as both my parents worked full-time and unsociable hours. There was only one black teacher at my primary school. That was Mrs. Thompson. But the classes were big, and they were full of BAME pupils. We lacked BAME role models. We lacked BAME mentors. People always ask me, Ronx, do you remember when you decided you wanted to be a doctor? In all honesty, I knew that I wanted to be a doctor after watching ER on TV. No lie, real talk. There were no doctors in my family. I don't even think that I'd actually even met a BAME black doctor. So, today I give thanks to Dr. Benton, the surgical doctor in ER, because without his fictional character, I may not be who I am today. There were no BAME role models in my life. There were no BAME mentors. Because of my isolated living situation, I watched a lot of medical TV and I read a lot of medical books, as these were the days before social media. I told absolutely anybody who would listen that I wanted to be a doctor. But despite this, I was never really actively encouraged to pursue this dream in primary school. I had no professional BAME role models. I had no mentors. Department of Education data, and you can all check this out, suggests that in 2016 and 2017, a majority of students at Key Stage 1, so that's 5 to 7 years, in all ethnic groups meet the expected educational attainments in like English, phonetics, maths, etc., etc. I was one of those primary school students, and because of this, I was encouraged to take 11 plus exams, for which I passed. I still firmly believed that I would become a doctor, and because of this, I achieved a place at a private school. But home life was not easy for me. I was physically and emotionally abused, and school was my sanctity away from home. And unsurprisingly, in secondary school, I was a troubled student. I had an eating disorder. I self-harmed. I was disruptive. I behaved in ways that screamed, "She needs attention, help, something is wrong." But these issues were never addressed. With hindsight, I can only imagine it's because the school didn't know how to, or worst case scenario, because I was hitting the grades, my personal life wasn't of interest to them. I do not remember meeting any black teachers during my time at secondary school. I had no BAME role models. I had no BAME mentors. I also lacked the agency to ask for help. I survived my abuse by studying hard. I was going to be a doctor. And like many BAME people, I had a resilience and a desire to survive. So, against all the odds, I passed my GCSEs with mostly A's and A stars. But behind the success, home life had got to a point where I basically had to leave. So I left home at the age of 16. I made this decision by myself, in the absence of a role model, in the absence of a mentor. I gained a place at a state sixth form, but things were becoming too hard to manage. I was living in a hostel and self-funding my existence. Don't get me wrong, I think there were teachers that knew what was going on, but I didn't have the agency to speak up, and I was extremely embarrassed and ashamed. I relied on the kindness of parents of my school friends. I had no role models. I didn't have a mentor. I took a year out after the first year of sixth form to work and save money. Looking back in sixth form, nobody ever went through interview technique with me. There was no exam prep. I wasn't told what to wear to a medical interview. And if I'm honest, I can't be sure that the teachers truly believed that I would make it. I had no role models. I had no mentors. I attended open days alone. Lo and behold, I managed to receive 3 London Russell Group Medical School offers, and I received an unconditional offer to study biomed. So results day came. I got AA, double B. I needed AAA, B. I didn't know what to do. All that struggle and hard work to get AA, BB, which considering what I had been through was amazing, but for the medical schools, it just wasn't enough. The college teachers urged me to take biomed as it was better than nothing, but I didn't want to. I had zero idea what to do next. I had no role model. I had no mentor. A friend's mum told me to call up the university and see what my options were. So I did. I didn't really know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I had no role model. I had no mentor to guide me. We just had a chat. A day later, I received a phone call and was accepted into medical school. Medical school was hard. I didn't enjoy most of my time there. I look back and I realised that my particular needs, which at the time I thought were unique to me, and now I know aren't, were not addressed. Don't get me wrong, I had some of my special, greatest moments at university. I fell in love for the first time at university. But I also experienced some of my most really difficult times. Examples being, I had no idea what was expected of me. I had relative financial poverty and lots of financial pressure. I had to work at the weekend and after lectures. I lacked parental support. I didn't actually live on the university campus. I had unresolved emotional issues. There was a lack of BAME visibility within staff and my fellow students, and I didn't realise the reality of failing a year. Imagine, add all of this, all of the other anticipated worries that people have about university. Sounds pretty rubbish, doesn't it? As BAME people, we are told by our elders that life is a struggle, that we have to work twice as hard as white people to achieve the same goals. So with this in mind, I wrongly normalised my medical school struggle and bumbled my way through, taking adversity on the chin and always moving on to the next. I didn't have any academic role models who looked like me. And because of the university culture of trying to be best at all costs, I didn't feel comfortable asking for help. I had no BAME role models. I had no BAME mentors. I 100% believe that this should not have been the case. Universities have a responsibility to their BAME students. University staff must understand by default, BAME students require specific and unique opportunities to improve our experience of medical school and to improve our outcomes. I attended counselling, but it didn't work for me. I had to repeat a year, which is common amongst BAME students. I felt rubbish. I didn't do BSc. I was granted a year out to work and save money. So at this point, I'm 2 years behind my original year 1 cohort. The clinical years came as a shock to me. I was still working at the weekends, and I felt stereotyped as the student that was always ill-prepared, the struggling student. I had no role models or mentors to talk about this with. Electives came and went, another expense I had to work for. Again, no role models, no mentors. The final exam period came. I quit my job to study more. And this month, 7 years ago, I completed medical school, the proudest day of my life. I actually remember a lecturer congratulating me on exam day. He actually said to me he didn't think I would make it. Imagine telling somebody who you know that is struggling, not really offering help, and as a congratulation, you tell them, I didn't think you would make it. Foundation years 1 and 2 were spent in deep, darkest Cumbria. Why? Because I didn't score enough in the selection process. Nobody told me that every year at medical school counted. I didn't realise the importance of always scoring highly in exams, or being part of researcher audits, or writing a paper, or doing a BSc, or winning national and international awards, or playing in the university's first sport team, or being voted head of XYZ society, or organising university activities. All I had wanted to do from the age of 12 was to go to medical school and become a doctor. That was it. It became clear to me that I held various intersections which had left me at a constant disadvantage to my peers. Nobody prepared me for my foundation years. I had no mentors. I had no role models. In this rural area of Cumbria, I experienced racism, homophobia, xenophobia, transphobia, sexism and misogyny in ways that I'd never experienced in the microcosm of my life in London. I didn't feel supported by my white colleagues or staff in Cumbria. Not because they weren't friendly, they were lovely, they were well-meaning, but they had zero idea about the reality of the situation of being one of the only BAME doctors in an area that was majority white. Examples of things I experienced are, I was referred to as coloured. Now this is only 5 years ago. I was asked if I was a boy or girl. I was asked, where are you really from? I was spoken to by patients in ways which were obvious that they were uncomfortable with me. I was always asked if I was trained in the UK, despite having this kind of Cockney accent, and so on and so on. My mental health was negatively impacted by my experience in the foundation years. But for the first time ever, I had a role model, and I had an unofficial mentor. A black GP trainee voluntarily provided emotional and pastoral support, but she was also having a difficult time and also felt unsupported. At times, us too were the only black doctors in that catchment area. One of my mentors was BAME. He was a fantastic man, and I know that he took it upon himself to mentor me. I learned a lot from him, but as a female, I felt uncomfortable telling him things. He was amazing though. I'll never forget him. I left Cumbria and moved back to London after foundation years. I took a well-needed year out for my mental health and to improve my score on the speciality personal spec form. I personally feel that the speciality personal spec form is archaic. I believe it has a bias towards those who come from academically privileged backgrounds. I mean, we all know that 80% of doctors come from 20% of the most selective public schools. So in this year out, I did a stint in emergency medicine. I went to India and was an emergency medic, and I worked in an emergency department. I was so lucky that my peers in emergency medicine were extremely supportive. I was again fortunate enough to have male and female BAME mentors. In particular, my female BAME mentors understood not only the struggles that an assertive female ethnic minority doctor may face, they took time to tell me what books to study from, what courses to take, what procedures to perfect. They took time in helping me with my presenting skills, interview technique. They even went through my speciality portfolio. And through osmosis, I learned leadership skills and improved my non-verbal skills. I learned that we can be effective, efficient, BAME female team leaders in a sea of males. They even invited me to social events where I could talk to them about non-medical things and receive advice. I owe a lot of who I am to these two women. That was there. I received mentorship. I had role models. I had an unofficial male BAME role model. He was actually there for me pastorally. He acted as a connect between myself and my clinical advisor, especially during a particularly difficult time in my training. He was an excellent clinician and offered up opportunities for me to step up and demonstrate to all my knowledge, skills and abilities. He 100% believed in me. Another black male role model continues to include me in speciality-specific opportunities. Now, don't get me wrong. There are senior white doctor consultants who were sensitive to the fact that I came from a lived background, and they also have positively facilitated my medical career. It saddens me, though, that these people are few and far between and not the status quo. And many of my fellow BAME doctors have not had the type of experience that I've had. I applied to emergency medicine and ranked highly enough to get the options that I wanted. And I now stand before you, an emergency medicine registrar, a mentor, and newly a TV presenter. With all that I have experienced, I know the positive impact of role modelling and mentoring. And because I 100% believe this, with all that I've experienced, I know the positive impact role modelling and mentoring has. And because of this, I believe that role modelling and mentoring will inspire BAME students to think about medicine, encourage BAME students to apply to medical school, and improve the chances of BAME students getting into medical school. So this is the last bit of my slide. It's of my presentation. It's quite quick. Can I have the... and just keep it there. So, Equality Lens 2, a BMA report, states that BAME doctors report increased inequalities in treatment within the profession, medical education and training. Dr. Terry John, chair of the BMA International Committee, said, "We need more black doctors putting themselves forwards and talking to children earlier." And I cannot agree more. You, me, us, we are the role models and mentors. This slide is just going to go through rolling, and it's just going to show pictures of some of the pictures of me doing things in the community, schools, etc. I don't think I'll have time to refer to it because I'm still going to talk, but it's just there for you all to have a look and see some of the things that I've done. So, what can we do at primary school level? As we know, lots of ethnic minority students in primary school actually do quite well. We need to nourish and cultivate these children's minds. We need to be volunteering to give talks about what it's like to be a doctor. We need to volunteer on careers days in the local schools. Even if you don't have children at those schools, even if you don't really know anybody at the school, write in a letter, say, do you need somebody to give an inspirational talk or be visible? The children love this. Usually when I go into primary schools, I dress up in in scrubs. I bring some show and tell objects like a stethoscope or bandage, and usually I'm answering questions. Questions like, have you ever touched poo, Dr. Ronx? Yep, the answer's yes. Are you rich, Dr. Ronx? And the answer's no. The feedback that I've had has been amazing. Look, I don't want to force young people into a career of medicine, but I want them to see that they can be whatever they want to be. Some of these children have actually said to me that they've never met a black doctor. Imagine! One boy, I said to, he was told, what do you think, what type of doctor do you think Dr. Ronx is? And he said, and I quote, "You are a receptionist type of Dr. Ronke. You answer the phone." Imagine, that was an honest response from a 9-year-old kid. So, secondary school, prior to A-levels. In terms of erasing institutional racism and bias, I don't have the answer. I think Renee Lodge's book, Why I No Longer Talk to White People About Race, is essential reading for all and can equip all young people, their parents, everyone in this room, with the knowledge of race theory so that it's not really a shock to them later on in life. I have given generic lectures about being a doctor at secondary school level. I've given focus lectures to groups of BAME and disadvantaged young people about the medical school process. You can all do that. You can all write letters to various secondary schools and just volunteer yourself. I think if universities are serious about improving BAME medical student numbers, then they maybe should be thinking about linking medical school students with prospective BAME students from state schools. Maybe this could be a paid role. Also, mentor people in your family. These young people are crying out for mentors, they're crying out for role models. They're not always going to ask. We need to volunteer ourselves. I take on a mentor every single year. So this year I've actually got a medical school student who's I'm mentoring. It doesn't have to be face-to-face. We email each other, we WhatsApp each other. Sometimes we'll meet for coffee, but I am her mentor. I am her role model. Young people need work experience. You all here can facilitate that. You can find out how the processes work within your institution, and then you can give that information to secondary schools in your area. Or personally, you may volunteer to take on a student and let them shadow you in what you do. So, medical students. Prospective medical students in secondary school, they need to know how to enrich their UCAS forms. They need to know the importance of continuing with their extracurricular activities. They need to demonstrate an interest in caring for people. They need to know that medicine can be done as a second degree. And they need to know that failure isn't a setback. We need to be telling them these things. In college and sixth form years, the Department of Education states that A-level attainments, so the percentage of students at least getting 3 A grades at A-level were 11% of all white folk, 5% of all black folk, 10% Asian, and 24% of all Chinese people taking A-levels at that time. So at this level, black A-level students really need our help. The UCAS form is daunting, the exams are daunting, the interviews are daunting. Independently, not-for-profit groups such as Melanin Medics run a short course medicine taster session, application tips and advice, and provide insight into the life as a medical student or doctor. More of us should be joining these groups and volunteering and offering our time. I spent 2 hours with a Somalian boy from a poor background. He was the first to apply to university in his family. He was doing academically brilliantly, but he needed interview technique help. We went through everything, from what to wear, how to shake hands, how to answer questions. Some of us think that this is a given. It really, really isn't. These young people need our help. So he applied he got a place at medical school, and I'm pleased to say that he's now going to King's. So other things that we can do: donating books, offering up our books, And in this last bit, some medical school and some facts. With just over 80% of medical school entrants coming from 20% of the most selective public schools. Another fact, I captured from the GMC website in 2015, 35% of all medical students were from BAME backgrounds, and only 3% of all of our doctors are black. The Right Mix report by the BMA says that 7% of the UK population educated at independent fee-paying schools make up 51% of the most influential doctors in our profession. We really need to help our medical students. Some of them need separate financial assistance. I know that there's an initiative in Birmingham where the Birmingham University have lowered the grades expected for BAME students. They're given specific opportunities, financial assistance, and allowed to enter university at slightly lower grades. To this day, all of them have graduated and all of them have done well. BAME medical students need specific, separate opportunities. I truly believe that we are the mentors, that we are the role models. Lastly, universities could consider paying BAME doctors like me to mentor BAME students. I'm doing this off my own back. I don't get paid extra for this. This is because I have a desire and a passion to help the younger generations get to medical school. Why should I have to do this for free? I'm not the problem with the system. Universities also need to invest appropriate pastoral care for its BAME students, especially those in areas who are working in areas of very little cultural diversity. Clinical educational supervisors need to be separate from BAME mentors. BAME mentors can be off-site, so I was in Cumbria, I could have been linked to somebody in London, we could have had email chats or Skype chats. That really would have reduced the impact of that Cumbria had on me. And at speciality training, mentorship. The following statement is adapted from the BMA website. All educators and mentors must be sensitive to diversity bias potential and form positive relationships despite people's backgrounds. We must identify early on when students are in difficulty and need help, and we must be active in creating specific and unique opportunities to mitigate these difficulties. I don't have the answers. I know mentoring and role modelling works. I understand that it feels unfair that we BAME people have to do extra labour when it comes to navigating the NHS system that isn't really designed to allow us to flourish. But I leave you with the quote from Nelson Mandela. Sometimes it falls upon a generation to be great. You can be that generation. You, me, we are the role models and the mentors. I truly believe that you cannot be what you do not see. Be somebody's Dr. Benton. That's it.
Okay, so Ronx said to me and said to us, this will eat into your lunch break, but it will be worth it. And you know what, I'm sure I'm speaking for all of you, it was worth it. Thank you very much. And you know, I want to thank you for what was a very moving account of a very lonely journey, but one of huge determination and one in which you are giving to others that which you were denied. And I think that is an incredible living example of a person that's achieving real noble change. And I speak on behalf of all of us. We salute you and we applaud you. Thank you very much. That was really great. We haven't got time for questions now, but you have offered to be around. And if there's a way I can ask both Subodh and yourself, Ronx, to be part of the panel in the afternoon, I'll see what I can do. Otherwise, please ask questions over lunch. I will ask for everyone to come back here at the time of 1:35. So it's a shorter lunch, but I look forward to seeing everyone back at 1:35. Thank you.